The Russian President Vladimir Putin has now delivered a furious rejection of the Ukraine peace talks, branding the recent cross-border attacks as an act of terror. And he's also demanded, in his words, and I quote him here, "Who negotiates with those who bet on terror?" The Russian leader delivered his ultimatum with chilling finality, ruling out any ceasefire with Ukraine. Now, Putin has warned that Kiev will exploit any fighting pause to rapidly rearm and strengthen its military position.
They are asking for a summit meeting. But how can such meetings be held in these conditions? What is there to talk about? How can we negotiate with those who rely on terror?
Now, Ukraine's push for an unconditional 30-day truce hit a brick wall during Monday's Istanbul peace negotiations. Moscow's response was pretty swift. Now, Russia has demanded that Ukraine should completely withdraw from the 4 eastern and southern regions that Moscow claims as its own territory, something that Ukraine is not ready to abide. Now, Putin exploded over the weekend attacks on Russian border infrastructure, including a bridge strike that has derailed a train and also killed about 7 people. The Russian president accused Ukraine of orchestrating these terrorist operations, specifically to thwart the negotiation process. And now Ukraine has released footage from its own official Twitter handle showing as to how Ukraine executed its daring drone strikes inside of Russia. The footage that the Ukrainian Defense Ministry shows as to how the drones zoomed in on the targets, how the drones pinpointed the weak points, the most vulnerable points on the Russian bombers, and then destroyed them. Now, Ukraine's operation targeted 4 key air bases and claims to have destroyed an estimated 40 heavy nuclear bombers by smuggling trucks of first-person view drones deep inside Russia. And amongst the destroyed planes were rare Russian A-50 spy planes that were damaged in this operation that Ukraine has called as Spiderweb. And American concerns are mounting pretty rapidly. The U.S. envoy for Ukraine, General Keith Kellogg, has issued an urgent warning that Ukraine's Operation Spiderweb, devastating drone strikes against Russia's strategic bombers, has triggered unpredictable and potentially catastrophic responses from Moscow. Remember, Trump had said that he wasn't informed by Kiev about these deep strikes that were carried out.
And I'm telling you, the risk levels are going way up. I mean, what happened this weekend, people have to understand in the national security space, when you attack an opponent's part of their national survival system, which is their triad, the nuclear triad, that means your risk level goes up because you don't know what the other side's going to do.
All right, now joining us on the broadcast to give us more perspective on what's unfolding in the Russia-Ukraine war, we've got Professor Peter Kuznick, who's a professor of history and director of Nuclear Studies Institute at the American University. He's joining us live on this broadcast. Now, Professor Kuznick, the statement by the Russian president, who negotiates with those who bet on terror, in the aftermath of this Ukrainian daring attack of targeting Russian nuclear bombers, do you think that all talks of a ceasefire are now off the table?
It's clear that the ceasefire is off the table. The ceasefire was really off the table even before these attacks. You know, there are some very fundamental questions right now. Trump's spokespeople have said that he was out of the loop, that he didn't know about this. That's very alarming. If Trump didn't know, it's almost certain that U.S. intelligence and European intelligence were involved in planning and executing these attacks. If they somehow excluded Trump from that, that says a lot about his actual control. If he did know, which is more likely in my view, and he allowed this to happen, then any trust between Trump and Putin is out the window, and the chances of ending this war become that much more slim. General Kellogg issued an appropriate warning there when he talked about the risk level going up. We are at a moment now that is really the most dangerous moment that we've faced since the height of the Cuban Missile Crisis. Russia has to respond somehow demonstratively. Putin is under a lot of pressure. I know this from people who have spoken to him as well as from other sources. Putin is under a lot of pressure from the hawks in his own country who want a much more decisive demonstrative attack. We're hoping that this does not mean the use of nuclear weapons, but even still, any escalation at this point is terrible for all sides. The world has got to intervene aggressively because we're at a moment where things can go out of control. And that's what General Kellogg is warning about, and that's what I'm concerned about right now.
You know, I think you've touched upon several very key issues here because a lot of people have raised this concern, considering the complexity of this operation that Ukraine managed to pull off, the fact that the drones would have had to rely on this sophisticated intelligence and perhaps even satellite data to go and carry out those precision attacks on those nuclear bombers. The possibility that the Americans were perhaps not involved is very slim. But if the Americans were involved, is it possible that to stage attacks on nuclear bombers of Russia, the American president would not have been in the loop? How does the power structure work? Can this happen at all?
It's inconceivable to me that the United States was not involved to some extent. The intelligence community, the British intelligence community, seems to have been very much involved. What we're seeing is Starmer, Macron, Merz, Callas, Tusk, and others as cheerleaders for more war. This is not in Ukraine's interest. The Europeans have this idea that if Putin wins in Ukraine, then he's going to gobble up one piece of Europe after another. Russia has struggled to even make advances against Ukraine. It's madness to think that they're going to want to take on NATO at this point. What we need is everybody to step back. What we need is ultimately dealing with Russia's long-term security interests, a new strategic architecture in Europe that's going to reflect everybody's national security interests, and eliminating war as an alternative. As Narendra Modi has said, this is not a time of war. Clearly, it is a time of war, but he means in the nuclear age, we cannot risk this kind of warfare any longer. But what we're seeing now is a heightening of the level of danger to a point where I don't think we've seen it, certainly in our lifetimes, except possibly back in 1962.
I think that's a very valid point that you're making. The Indian Prime Minister, of course, has said that this is not a time of war. My final question to Professor Kuznick is this. Now that the attack is on the nuclear bombers of Russia, it is the prestige of Vladimir Putin that has been dented with this attack. How do you think Putin will respond to it?
Well, he's got a lot of options. So far, Trump and Putin have been silent. Their silence has been deafening. Putin has got Oreshnik missiles. He's already struck Ukraine once, taking out important military facilities with these Oreshnik missiles. Former U.S. National Security Advisor H.R. McMaster said that the United States won't have any system to defend against Oreshnik missiles for another 15 years. So I think that one of the things that we're anticipating as a possibility is strikes with these Oreshnik missiles, which could seriously harm Ukrainian military interests. I think Putin has got to respond pretty dramatically unless the world intervenes. We need an emergency meeting of the United Nations Security Council. We are getting too close to World War III at this point. And I can't imagine that Russia is not preparing a major counterstrike that's going to simply escalate the war and take us further and further away from a diplomatic solution at this point. I think Russia's they're convinced that they're going to win on the battlefield, and they're going to speed that up. They've already seemingly begun the spring offensive, and they're making faster gains on the battlefield than they've made in a very, very long time. So it's we're at a crucial moment now.
Indeed. Thank you very, very much, Professor Kuznick, for joining us with that perspective there.
My pleasure.